Good afternoon, all. Thank you for being here. It's a very honor to us to welcome you here in Ribeirão Preto, in the School of Economics, Business Administration and Accounting, in Ribeirão Preto campus, University of São Paulo. I would say just a few of words and then we can start our works today. So, we are being followed by researchers and practitioners abroad and from other states in Brazil. I think it's really important to register this. And we are grateful to those who help to share the information about this event. The workshop is organized by the Public Sector Accounting and Governance in Brazil. It's a research group here and counts with the financial and institutional support of the PhD in accounting. Professor Maísa help a lot helping institutionally and also with financial support to be possible all of us being here. And we also thank to the Brazilian National Treasury, Secretaria do Tesouro Nacional, to the institutional support. And also this event is part of the agenda of Studi Group of Policies and Development, hosted by the Institute of Advanced Studies, University of São Paulo, the branch here in Ribeirão Preto. It's important to say our objective here is to contribute to the comparative research on public sector accounting. In this venue, we thought would be a good time to share the Brazilian experience on IPSA's convergence with the international community, and at the same time bring the European experience on accounting reforms. As observed by many browsing and co-authors, one co-author is here, Professor Eugenio Caperchione, the reforms are there for at least 20 years by now, the reforms in public sector. In most of the OECD countries, the standardization of public sector accounting is being run since the 80s. So our expectation today is look at the public sector accounting harmonization process as a social science phenomenon, observing two different experiences side by side and maybe explore some conclusions in a comparative approach. We have different countries in Europe compared to Brazil, different contexts, different political system, history, and public financial management contexts also. Then we should keep in mind, we should consider this when we are comparing. And we are just comparing to understand, obviously not to elect the better, probably many experience will be adjusted over time anyway. So, let me say something about our agenda, how our agenda is organized for today. We start with the European experience with Professor Eugenio Caperchione. Then we start immediately with the Brazilian experience with Bruno Mangualde. I will present both properly. And then we open for discussions and reflections. As a discussant, I would like to say to our web audience, we have here Ricardo Lopes Cardoso from Getúlio Vargas Foundation. Thank you, Ricardo, to act as a discussant here. And Alexandre Pigato from the Federal University of Santa Maria. Thank you, Pigato, for being here. Then for our web audience, please feel free, comfortable to send questions if you like, using LinkedIn, Skype, or even email. You can. The email is psagib.usp.br. I think it's not possible to read in our slides. Then we start with the European experience. Professor Eugenio Caperchione Since 2009, he is the chair of the Comparative International Government Accounting Research, CIGAR. He is full professor at Department of Economics in the Universidade de Studi di Modena in Reggio Emilia. He has a dozen of scientific works on public sector accounting, and he has dedicated his career on comparative public sector accounting research. So I'm most honored to welcome our very special guest from Piacenza, Italy, Professor Eugenio Caperchione. Please, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you for me if this is okay soon. I am also very honored to have received this invitation. Also because the people who invited me are people who are working a lot, also in the international arena, in order to make, to establish a connection and to discuss with the international community of public sector comparative accounting. So I'm really honored, and I'm really interested also in understanding what is happening in this country. So probably this meeting will be much more an occasion for me to learn about Brazil than for the Brazilian audience to learn about Europe. But in any case, I think this is important. Let me just check the computer, because you need to, there's a technical issue to be solved. Okay. Yes. Okay, so my presentation is, of course, about Europe. I am sorry this presentation is in English and not in Portuguese. I believe that internationalization does not necessarily mean that we all have to speak in English, but this is today the lingua franca, so we will try to do this at our best. I hope that next time I will also be able to discuss in your language. And I am a bit afraid of giving a presentation about Europe, so to be honest, I don't think that you necessarily have to learn. I agree with what André Aquino told us before, that we are not here to, this is not the beauty contest, so we are not putting side by side the European and the Brazilian experience, and we have to choose who has the best experience. But we have to mutually learn, because in social sciences the comparison is the experiment. So we are not working with chemistry, we are not physicians, we work in social sciences. And so really, yes, I have been worked for many years on comparisons. I think that looking to what happens elsewhere, looking to the best practices, but also to the mistakes that have occurred elsewhere, is a way to learn, to avoid mistakes. So this is the attitude, the spirit I invite you and people on the web to have. So shall we give a look? And of course, for all the people who are in Brazil listening to me, the task is to try to translate this, and it will be your task, much more than my task, to translate this in your term, in your system. What do the European challenges tell to Brazil, to possible challenges of these days or of the near future? Then, of course, for the European audience, it will be very interesting, as I told before, to listen to what happens in Brazil from the voice of a person who is having a big role on the reports. My presentation is concerned with the current situation of accounting and auditing in Europe. I will also deal with the problems of harmonization, with the so-called European public sector accounting standards, the European way to IPSAS, And I also have some suggestions for different paths concerning both harmonization and accounting standards. I think it is important to clarify a bit the aim of my presentation. So the background. The background is that we are now experiencing a process of harmonization of public sector accounting throughout Europe, and Europe here means the countries belonging to the European Union. These days 28 countries. When the UK will leave, there will be 27. And the European Commission has started this process, and it claims that it is necessary and it will be beneficial. I am a bit skeptical. Of course, I may be wrong, but I think it is important to clarify a position, and of course, in the end, you will judge. Everybody will judge. Okay, shall we start now with the content? I have some starting questions. We have had 30 and more years of reform, and can we say that, so you may be interested to this, you read, the PhD students study, there are reforms in Europe. Have the European countries arrived to a similarity of their accounting systems? Are they reaching an harmonization? Is there anything which we can call harmonization? We would expect this, but if this is not the case, what is the reason for this? And what can be done in order to reach harmonization? And what is an appropriate set of accounting standards? So the question is there or not harmonization, and why? I will refer to two pieces of research, an older one concerning only 5 countries, and a more recent one concerning 14 countries. Let me start here with one definition. When I started to research about harmonization, I consider that in reality the harmonization can happen at different levels. So I suggest that we can call harmonization in these different ways. Vertical harmonization, if inside one country we can we can experience that all public sector institutions are having an harmonized accounting system. A system which is more or less the same. So think also in Brazil, from the union to the federation to the states to the municipal level. Okay, this is one way. Horizontal harmonization, in my vocabulary, means in one country, again in one country, between public sector institutions and private companies. So they are independent from one another, but sometimes this happens. And so the last one is the international harmonization. Harmonization between public sector systems of different countries. Why am I defining them? Because they are not the same, and we cannot expect, and we really don't see, that if one harmonization is in place, another harmonization is also in place. In other words, you can see some cases in which one harmonization reinforces the other, but in other cases it is not. If in Germany, to make an example, a common practice, a policy, is to have an accounting system for the public entities, which is following the same set of standards than private companies, this means that a horizontal harmonization is being pursued. This may be against international harmonization because the accounting standards of German private companies are different from the accounting standards of other institutions elsewhere. So sometimes you have to decide. Okay, I hope this is clear. And if, of course, if this is not clear, there will be room after the presentations to raise questions. Well, as I was telling, the first research concerned 5 countries. Some first findings from this first research, and it is that the findings is that most countries in this very small sample strive for horizontal harmonization. But even if they try to have some similarities or many similarities between private and public sector, the public sector remains with the budget, the fundamental issue of the budget before the year in order to authorize the orçamento, I think, in Portuguese. And the private companies do not have this. So this is, of course, different. Another finding from this first research is that also vertical harmonization is very popular among reformers. In the discourse, in the public opinion, if you speak to people in the parliament, in the government, they will tell you it is important to have one set of standards, one accounting system for all the public entities of the country. In reality, when you go to look what happens in the reality, the administrations are diverse and resist uniformity. Even if in this small sample, we can see that, for instance, because of the regional autonomy, which allows a freedom of choice, maybe there is someone pushing in order to have a system which is more or less the same from the top to the bottom, but in reality this is not the case. This is not the case in Germany, this is not the case in Spain. I was told maybe also in Brazil this is also not the case, so there are resistances to this. And what about international harmonization? I remind you, I'm talking about the first piece of research with only 5 countries. Well, I did interviewed, I looked for documents. I can say that the efforts are directed much more to national than international harmonization. So if we don't consider the rhetoric, if we consider the reality is that a lot of work is done in these countries in order to have internal, national harmonization, and the international is a bit of in the background. It is maybe a rhetorical aspect, maybe somebody is telling we should have international harmonization, but it is not in the top of the agenda, really. There are many reasons. One reason is that in your country, everybody in his, her country, she can decide what system he wants to have for the companies, the public sector, but you cannot decide what is the system for all countries. So you don't have sovereignty outside of your country. So this is, of course, an important aspect. Another aspect which I think should be considered is that the promoters of international harmonization are in many cases financial capital markets, accounting professions. The governments are not pushing a lot. I leave it open whether this is, whether governments should or should not push for international harmonization. I simply consider that it seems to me that financial markets and accounting professions are really eager to have it, and governments are less eager. Then shall we consider that if this happens in Europe, if the international harmonization is not a main objective in countries which are linked to each one to the other, because not Switzerland but the other, they are linked together in the European Union, it will be probably more difficult in countries in Latin America which have not close links to each other. But anyway, shall we go to a larger picture? And the larger picture is a study I conducted with other colleagues. I was one of the co-editors of a book in which 25 authors wrote about 24 countries. And we have a big picture on accounting, budgeting, and auditing. These are the countries. So I think you recognize here the most important European countries. 13 of them are part of the European Union. Switzerland is not part of it. So we think this is a really representative picture, also because the research was conducted with a uniform framework. Okay, what did we expect? And we are not opening a debate, but let's imagine I am asking you, what would you expect? Would you expect, as those who are studying, the PhD students, but also the colleagues, are you expecting that looking to these 14 countries, there will be a big, a medium, or a low level of harmonization? You think in your mind what you expect. I am answering now with I think there are 6 slides on central, regional, local government, and they will concern accounting and auditing. 3 times 2 is 6. Central, I'm not giving the full picture, I'm not commenting every item on the slide, otherwise I would use all my time. You can refer to the book. Andrea Busanelli has a copy of the book, so you can buy it, but you can also go to Andrea and ask for the book and read it. And surely your library can have one copy. Well, please follow me just looking the different names of cash accounting, accrual accounting, or other kinds of accounting in the different countries. And if you do this, you will notice that if we start with central government, these days, so this picture is updated end 2014, so I think it is quite recent yet, the central government is not uniform at budgeting level in the 14 countries, is a bit more uniform for accounting, so financial reporting, but not completely, because in financial reporting for central government we have modified cash, at least in Germany and the Netherlands, which are important countries. And if you look every country, you see that not necessarily the budget has the same accounting system of the financial reports. This is one picture. If we go to regional governments, this increases the diversity. In Germany, most states are with cameral or cash accounting, a few states with accrual, and there are other situations in these 14 countries. Similarly, or even, again, more complicated with local government. If we then move to auditing, we can notice that in central government, most auditors are the supreme audit institutions, both for budget statements and financial statements. There are some exceptions or notes, maybe some little amendments. The situation is much more different at regional and local governments, with situation where there is no audit, or there are private certified professional accountants, so coming from the private sector, or public sector professionals. Really the situation is really different. So in one sentence, the finding here is that there is a pluralistic mosaic. Okay? In Italy we have many interesting mosaic from the old Byzantium and from the old Rome, and this is really a mosaic, a puzzle, and the picture could not be more fragmented than that, really. Well, I'm not telling that things have to remain like this. I'm only reading. I think we are as a team, we are reading the reality, and we are understanding that it is fragmented. Okay, despite 30 years of reform. Then, another step we conducted. This was conducted in a qualitative way. We asked the authors of the different chapters of the book to investigate, to express their opinion about the readiness to change of their country. So the question was, is your country willing to reform again, or anyway to reform, to improve public sector accounting? Is your country willing to harmonize public sector accounting? And is your country willing to adopt IPSAS, IFRS, EPSAS, a set of standards? And of course there are a number of factors related to the readiness to change, the education level of accountants, the maturity of the accounting system, political support, the course. A number of factors can explain this. But anyway, what was the reply? So I repeat, this is a judgment. The judgment and a bit also the information is that some countries say we are willing to harmonize the public sector. France, Greece, Portugal, Switzerland. Some other countries say this is already in place. Spain, Sweden, Finland. Some other countries simply say no, we are not willing, we are not considering these days to do this. And about the question, willingness to adopt IPSAS, IFRS or other sets of standards, some say yes, but some and not a few say no, we are not willing to do this because we have our tradition, because we have our set of standards, or maybe the answer is more political, like UK, IFRS are already a source of inspiration. You can read this both ways. You can read it as IFRS are like IPSAS, but you can also read it like we will keep our IFRS, and if someone else is willing to use IPSAS or other set of standards, please go ahead. But we are willing to maintain our independence, our autonomy on this. So please try to remind that I am trying to make a research about the existence of a harmonized system, or at least the feasibility of a harmonization. And here I start to see some signs of some difficulties existing towards a possible harmonization. Well, I spoke a lot about harmonization, but what is it really? Because I have not defined this word. I said vertical, horizontal, international, but what is it? Well, the author we have to refer at first is Christopher Nobbs. Everybody quotes him, so I'll do too. Harmonization is a process of increasing the compatibility of accounting practices. We make them compatible, and we set bounds to their degree of variation. International harmonization has many supporters. So, sorry, go back. So harmonization is not standardization. It's not to have exactly the same, is to have a compatibility of practices. Okay? My plug here, the electricity plug I have, is compatible from Italy to the Brazilian plug. They are harmonized. They are not standardized. They are different. Okay? But they can work together. Also well, I don't enter into electricity, but I learned that there are also other things too, which would be interesting to discuss. There are some open issues for harmonization, if we want to pursue it. The countries we have, I think I have documented this, the countries do not start from the same point. The accountants have different backgrounds and qualifications. If we want to harmonize, I'm not speaking of standardization, which would be more difficult. If we simply want to harmonize, we have to invest a lot of energy and a lot of money. So, any recommendations for harmonization? One is not to forget that public sector accounting is relevant for a country's sovereignty. And so before before resigning to their sovereignty, the countries will fight, especially the big countries. You can relatively easily see small countries or big countries with a weak economy to accept that someone else is suggesting what their accounting system has to be. Of course, this is always life, and the economy is like this. If you need help, then you accept someone else's condition. But big countries, rich countries, tend to privilege their own system. Second recommendation, the process in order to harmonize is important, because harmonizing is not imposing the view of somebody on someone else, but it is to come closer to each other, in a sense. In other words, the harmonization should not have somebody in power and somebody who is weak. Harmonization should be a process of mutual understanding between countries who share a common view. And I think that this is today a problem at European level, because somebody is maybe forgetting this important element. Well, I was telling to you that I would speak about harmonization and public sector accounting standards, just to give in this 40 minutes, not more, a broad view of what is happening in Europe, so in 28 or more countries. One thing which is happening about the standard setting is that we are discussing EBSAs. You may not be familiar with this. Eurostat started, and the European Commission started in 2011, a process which should provide Europe with a set of standards. What is Eurostat? I copy-paste from the web. Eurostat is the statistical office of the European Union, and its mission is to provide high-quality statistics for Europe. So it's not an office of accounting, it's an office of statistics. In 2011, there is a budgetary frameworks directive approved, and according to this directive, the EU member states should have accounting systems which cover all subsectors of general government, and which provides the information needed to generate the data which are needed at Eurostat level to collect the information, to monitor what is happening in the European Union, to monitor whether the member states are complying with the so-called Maastricht parameters and with all the rules of the European Union. So, what is happening? Just I try to add some words for the Brazilian audience. What is happening is that this agency is not an accounting agency, but it has an important task in governing the European Union. It's a part of the European government. It says we need information. The quality of information these days is bad. Those days we had the Greek crisis and the financial crisis, and it was evident, apparent that some data coming from Greece were not correct. So the decision was we have to ensure that the data are clean, they are trustable, and Eurostat takes the lead and says we have the solution. Okay. So I am not explaining all the process, but the suggestions of Eurostat, and I am quoting a report prepared in 2013, which is an important report giving the line for the subsequent tasks. The suggestions are: there is a strong need for harmonized systems and for an accrual-based public sector accounting. So first, harmonized and accrual. Everybody in the European Union, according to Eurostat, should move to accrual. Second, the standards, the accounting standards cannot be ipsos. They cannot be implemented as they currently are. What is the problem behind this? In a way, the problem is that ipsos are decided by a private institution, and it is not in the history, in the tradition of European countries to accept, to lose at this level their sovereignty by accepting that the International Federation of Accountants can set the standards for the countries. So the solution was ipsos will be a suitable reference, we will shadow the ipsos, we will try to confirm, but the final word should be kept at European level. So we have ipsos. This is the proposal, and so the EU, European member states, will have, yes, the last word. Okay, if this is the point, and you can read more on this on the book I was quoting and in the first chapter, then what are the issues to be discussed? So I come now to the problems and to a proposal of a solution. And then, of course, I finish my presentation. I think that this position has to be discussed. I have no authority to say it is wrong, and in reality I discussed with the people over there, and we are not agreeing on this, and maybe I am wrong, but at least it is interesting, I think, for scholars to know what are the issues on the table, and some of these issues may arise also in your country or in other countries, so shall we pay some attention? I have some reservations on the content and on the process. About the content, some authors, some important authors in reality, Lider is the founder of the CIGAR Network, he discards the expectation that ipsos could actually allow a uniform reporting. Why? Because any set of standards, and especially EPSAs, if governments, if 28 governments, 27, 30, if many governments have to have the last word, there will be political compromise. Can you only imagine, just to stay to something which is also important today in Brazil, how much political debate and conflict there could be about the representation of the pension liability. This is an extremely critical issue, and it can change the government net worth in a government net deficit. It can oblige to increase taxation suddenly, and politicians may be willing not to disclose this, may be willing to have the room, the hands free to report differently. Anyway, politicians get elected, not accountants. So we may criticize, but we may also recognize that democracy is the best thing we have, because we don't have anything else. So this is a complex issue, okay? So shall we not be sure that EPSAs will allow a uniform report? Other critics come from other authors, Rowan Jones from the UK and Caruana from Malta. They say EPSAs transformed from IPSAs are forgetting the budget and are forgetting the audit. So there will be problems to this level. The German Federal Court of Audit is worried about the big cost of a move to EPSAs, and so they say, please shall we keep a lot of attention, because they say we don't need it. And if I have referred many times to Germany today, but Germany is probably the most important country in Europe. It cannot decide for Europe, but it has an important voice, okay? And if they don't agree, this means something. Then there will be, again, other costs. So, problems on the content, but problems or reservations also on the process. And the process is that this decision to me has not been discussed sufficiently. There is not a lot of agreement. We should need a more open discussion and participation. Discussion and participation can mean delaying things, can mean trying to buy time, to postpone decisions. In this case, they are not good, but they can be a way in order to come to an agreed upon solution. And if this is the case, they are much more interesting, because then everybody will follow, because he has contributed. There are resistances from countries. I have with me a document which is very recent from not only the federal but also the state court of accounts in Germany. Someone is preparing alternative measures. Then, to go a bit quick to the conclusions. But what can international standards really provide? Because I took for granted that if we could reach harmonization, maybe it would be interesting. I explained that after 30 years of reform in Europe, we have not reached it. I gave a picture of the situation in different countries. I said somebody is willing to try again, but scholars in the private sector tell us that if we look to the private sector, which has a longer tradition of harmonization, despite the wide adoption of international financial reporting standards, a lot of divergences remain in place because there are policy options, enforcement practices, language issues, so we cannot believe that it is easily done and we cannot expect too much. Then, how can I conclude this? This not the talk, but the biggest part of the talk. Harmonization is still far away. The likelihood of harmonization, says Jones, Luder, Portal, Land, the likelihood of harmonization of national government budgeting and accounting anytime soon beggars belief. We are away from that. Then, if this is the situation, if there is an obstacle, we can try to continue to go against this obstacle. We can jump over it, or we can find a different way. I don't know whether looking for a different way is smart, but it is a possibility to consider. Then, a couple of slides here and I finish. How can we cope with differences? Heterogeneity is there. We cannot pretend heterogeneity does not exist. One suggestion is, why is Eurostat not deciding that it is too complicated and too expensive to oblige 28 countries to change public sector accounting at federal or state, regional, local government, just in order to allow Eurostat to have the information they need? Maybe it would be nice, but probably it is too complicated. Why don't they decide what the important information are? This is mandatory, but every country can decide to continue with its system if it considers it is the good system, and that's all. Because accounting is not meant to give information to the top. Accounting is collecting information for yourself in order to manage your administration. So we cannot change this, and this is a bit the problem of statisticians versus accountants. Accountants, they work for the individual administrations. So this is the proposal of a dual system. The separation between a mandatory reporting, essential, little, and the rest of accounting at national level. There are risks, but the current situation is not very better than this. This is being discussed in our research agenda. I have published with colleagues an article on this, published on public money and management. I would be enthusiastic to have colleagues in Brazil to discuss with us, maybe to take this framework to analyze also their country. We would like to study the benefits of sustaining an accounting pluralism, in a word, and respect the fact that countries are different, institutions, laws, governments are different. I think that this is a role of the accountants, and of the academics. We can help to suggest and to evaluate solutions. I think I will stop here. I recommend only a couple of things. Let me please make a short ad. but it is an ad useful for scholars. One ad is about a very recent special issue which was published in November, Van Elden and others. Politicians and accounting information, a marriage of convenience. On public money and management, you will find an important set of papers which tackle the issue of but are politicians really using the information? Because if this is the case, then there are consequences on how the information has to be collected and delivered and reported. If they don't use, again we have to study why they don't use, maybe we have to change things so that there is an impact of this very fact, they use or they don't use, in what we as scholars and accountants have to provide to them. This is one thing. The second thing is that despite the relative interest of my presentation, I'm sure that many of you will be interested in knowing more about the network where public sector accounting is being studied these days. Therefore, may I suggest you to visit the CIGAR Network website. It is the very new website of the scholars dealing with comparative international governmental accounting research. May I invite you to come to Porto on 8 and 9 June next year, Porto, Portugal, for our 30th anniversary conference. And finally, may I invite you to write papers for a special issue on innovations in public sector financial and management accounting, for better off or worse. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Professor Eugenio, for this instigating talk. And we skip immediately to Bruno Mangualde. I will present Bruno to talk about Brazilian experience on Ipsa's convergence. Bruno Mangualde is from the National Treasury, Brazilian National Treasury, Secretaria do Tesouro Nacional. He is an accountant and has his Master on International Accounting and Finance by University of Birmingham, supervised by Professor Ron Hodges. He worked with Professor Lino Martins in his professional specialization in budget and finance by the School of Finance Administration, ESAF. Mangualde is a financial analyst at the Brazilian National Treasury in the Ministry of Finance. And he is the manager of norms and accounting policies, being responsible to the operational handbooks which diffuse all accounting recommended practices to the entire federation here. Mangualde, please. Thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Well, good afternoon to all of you. My name is Bruno Mangualde and I work for the National Treasury, and I will present this in English in respect to the international audience, but for me it would be much more comfortable to talk in Portuguese with you anyway. I'm going to talk about the public sector accounting reforms in Brazil. These reforms are in course right now, and the public sector accounting framework is really changing in Brazil. As you may know, accounting in Brazil, at least in the public sector, was used only to fuel the law needs, not to any kind of decision-making purposes or even to understand a little bit more of the public sector assets and liabilities. Now things are changing, and these changes will not move on from day to night. It takes time, and it has started for something like 7 or 8 years, and it's still in course, and I'm going to show you a little bit of the details of these reforms. Well, our agenda here, at first I will just show an international overview of the public sector accounting reforms. The PSA is the acronym for public sector accounting, and after that I will show the main marks here in Brazil in order to illustrate it to you. After that I will show some legal and political strategies that are being used here in order to provide and to make these changes come true. And after that I will show the technical issues and the next steps that are a little bit ahead, and also our expectations. Well, at first, public sector accounting reforms, as has been shown by Eugenio Caperchione, is not a reality just in Brazil. It has started something like a few decades ago in many different countries, and Brazil is working in these reforms nowadays, but it has started mainly due to a different kind of view about the public sector management. Many countries discuss ways to improve the management of the public sector, and a few decades ago it started a movement called New Public Management started in order to give a little bit more efficiency to the public sector. And this movement was kind of, they believed that the private sector had better tools and also ways to manage the resources, so they could learn with the private sector and take these decisions and take these lessons inside the public sector. And so the new public management was, we can say that it was a kind of a movement that started to bring to the public sector these new techniques. And looking to the financial management, we had a part of this new public management called New Public Financial Management. So if the public sector could learn with the private sector, the public sector financial management could learn as well. And so many countries and governments, not only countries but also regional and local governments, started to work with public sector accounting reforms. And the public sector accounting reforms has two different fundamentals. The first one is the use of accrual accounting. And not all governments use it to use accrual accounting. Most of them use it to use cash basis accounting because it's much easier to control the cash that gets inside your pocket or outside your pocket. You just need a watchdog there, and the dog will control everything that's coming inside and outside. But some countries started asking if this was the best way to manage public resources. For example, there are many economic events that are not captured by the cash flow movement, such as depreciation. So they started changing this framework, and they started changing, a few countries started changing this from cash basis to accrual basis, as well as using accounting standards. By the time that these countries started to do that, there was not an international accounting standard that could be used as a benchmark. But nowadays we have the IPSAS, it's the main international accounting standards. Not only IPSAS, but we can use APSAS as well as a benchmark. However, we do not have any governance in APSAS. So many countries such as Australia and New Zealand started to make these reforms, and after that, a little bit after, the UK as well as Canada. And of course that these reforms are quite different from the one that is happening right now in Brazil, because for example, the UK, I know a little bit of it, the UK, they have different reforms for the federal government or the central government. This is not a federation. The central government as well as the local governments. So it's a very different reform that it's quite different from the one we are having here in Brazil. So many countries that are facing these accounting reforms are trying to work under accrual basis of accounting, as well as to use any kind of accounting standards. Could be the international accounting standards, could be local standards, and most of them, just like Professor Caperchione said, use local standards, but a few of them are observing, or at least have as a benchmark, the international public sector accounting standards. Oh yeah, and as well as accrual budget. I would like to talk to you about it because, well, I could see Brazil in your pictures. Of course, you're not studying Brazil, but it's a little bit similar to Portugal, or we have a kind of, for expenses here, we have a kind of modified accrual accounting here, but we still have a cash basis budget. So we're gonna face a few problems or a few challenges. Well, why use international accounting standards? The idea is to make public sector accounts comparable. We know that Brazil, most governments, or all governments, they follow the same regulation, they follow the same laws, mainly the law number 4320, our public sector law, our public sector financial law. However, we still have very different practices in each country, in each state, in each municipality, and it was quite hard to analyze the accounts as well as to take decisions based on that. I remember that some banks here in Brazil, they had specific offices and specific sectors just to analyze the public sector accounts from, or to analyze the balance sheet from a municipality or from the public sector, because people that had accounting background but were not experienced with public sector would not understand that. If you were an expert in IFRS, you would not understand anything related to public sector financial management. So we had to change it. We had to walk a little bit closer to the international trends, and we had to give a little bit more accountability to the public sector management, as well as to the way that we use our resources. And sometimes it was even hard to explain our public sector management to international institutions such as the World Bank or the International Development Bank. So we had a lot of difficulties there, and we would like to improve the comparability as well as the understanding of the public sector management, financial management. And this was one of the reasons that made Brazil started to study these trends. So what are the main milestones here in Brazil? Well, Brazil, of course, that accounting here did not start with, in 1964, it did not start with, it started really earlier than that, much earlier than that. We have a lot of milestones that come behind 1964, but we can say that 1964 is a very important milestone because it was when was published the law number 4320. That's our financial management law here in Brazil. And we had the military dictatorship there. We did not have many changes in relation to the public sector financial management. But in 1986, after the military dictatorship here in Brazil, the National Treasury was created. And the National Treasury was a kind of advance for the country because it was the first time that we separated the fiscal authority from the monetary authority, the central bank with the monetary authority and the National Treasury with the fiscal authority. And one of the first things that was done after the creation of the National Treasury was to centralize in a unique branch account, let's say this way, the management. Instead of that, before that, the federal government had thousands of bank accounts and it was really hard to manage that. Another thing that was created in the time was the system, the IT system that managed the public sector budget, federal public sector budget, as well as its finances. The system is called CIAF. It was created in 1987, and it's still in use today. And the system has had a unique chart of accounts. So for the first time in the country's history, we had only one system in order to manage our finances, and a very strong system, IT system, that is still in use nowadays. In 1997, the PSAGiB was created. At first it was the Public Sector Committee from the International Federation of Accountants. After a few years it was transformed in the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board. Nowadays Brazil has one member. There is my boss in the National Treasury. Right now he is in South Africa. There is a meeting there, and he represents Brazil in the board. But we had a lot of challenges by the time, because Brazil was facing a very strong inflation during the 90s and at the 80s and 90s. We even got in default in 1984 with Plano Gilson Funaro, with Gilson Funaro Ministry, and so we had hard times by that time. And it's really hard to make accounting in hyperinflationary conditions. It was even hard to plan your budget, because when it got ready, you got it approved, then the numbers were completely outdated. So you had to change everything. So Brazil went through a very strong agenda of reforms in the late 90s. And we faced, in my opinion at least, a situation that was a little bit more challenging than the situation we're facing right now. Just to make a parenthesis, here, of course, that I work for the National Treasury, and I'm quite linked to the National Treasury, but I would like to be clear that here I am expressing my thoughts, my views, and not the National Treasury opinions, just to be clear and to register that. So after these reforms, and these really hard reforms, Brazil published the Fiscal Responsibility Law. Here is in Portuguese, the Lei de Responsabilidade Fiscal. It was really very, very important for the public sector, because it set a kind of a limit for personal expenses with civil servants, as well as limits to the debt. It was really important because a little bit before that, many governments, they used the kind of inflationary tax. So they did not have any responsibility with the public sector spending. So what did they do? They spent much more than they earned. So what did they do? Instead of paying you in the correct date, they delayed the payment so that they would make money from the inflation. I would pay you 100 monetary units 2 or 3 months later, then it would not buy the same amount of goods. That's what they did. So with the Plano Real, with the inflation under control, they lost this tax. And what did they start doing? Well, instead of controlling their expenses, the governments here in Brazil started to use the public banks to fund their expenses. So I make some money, but I spend much more than I make. Where will I find the money to fill this gap? From the bank that I control. So what was happening here in Brazil? The public sector was kind of transferring its problems to the financial sector. And the financial sector was about to collapse. And it would take all our savings. So what did the federal government did by that time? They said, the federal government will help you, but we will assume part of your debt, part of your debt will go to the federal government, but instead we would like you to clear the financial sector, and we would like you to sell the banks, we would like you to control your expenses with personal, expenses with debt, and it was quite successful. Most state-owned banks were sold by that time to the private sector, and so the public managers, they could not take the money from the banks because they did not control the private sector banks. So it was a really important, we went through a very strong agenda of reforms, and one of the milestones, one of the main milestones of this agenda was after the Lei Camata 1 and Lei Camata 2, that Lei Camata law, Camata laws. These were laws that set the first numbers or the first limits for personal expenses. But we had the fiscal responsibility law, and it is still very important nowadays. It was based in New Zealand's acts as well as in a few of the United States acts. We could talk a lot about it, but it's not our main subject here. But in fact, I would say that we were quite successful. Well, by the beginning of this century, we had a better scenario. We had a situation where there was no more inflation, so we could make budgets, we could make accounting a little bit more, and we had fiscal responsibility law. Just a curiosity here, for example, and I will not be politically correct here, I will talk about names and, well, for example, the state of Alagoas in the 90s, they spent 105% on a cash basis of the revenues just with civil servants. So of course that it would collapse. It was just a matter of time, but it would collapse. So after these successful reforms, we had part of the needs to continue these reforms. And to continue these reforms, we need to make accounting important again in order to manage the public sector in Brazil. And part of it was to adopt accounting standards, a set of accounting standards for the whole federation. So the Council of Accountants, or the Institute of Chartered Accountants, I'm not sure about the correct translation, they published the first local government accountings in Brazil. Here you have you have the NBCT here, but you can see here Brazil GAAP, General Accounting Acceptable Principles. After that, we had in 2009 another milestone that was the transparency law that showed all the expenses and revenues from the governments, that showed the earnings and everything. But it did not show on an accounting base, it showed in our budget base. So it showed mostly budget execution. After that, we had in 2012 the IPSAS translated to Portuguese. I would like to congratulate Ricardo here because he was part of this process of translating the IPSAS to Portuguese. Oh yeah, as well as André, and also Pigato, of course. And we had a few other milestones, such as some accounting procedures in order to harmonize everything here in Brazil. And in 2014, a new system came into operation, but a system that collects the balance sheets of the subnational governments, as well as from the federal government, that is called SICONFI. This system is really important, and I will tell you why in a few minutes. In 2015, we started to plan a strategy to adopt the international accounting standards, but quite gradually, and it will not be a direct adoption. We will use the international standards as a benchmark in order to set our own standards, and these standards will be followed by the whole federation, and it's already this kind of reform or implementation plan is already working. And in 2016, we had the first results of this implementation plan that was the published the Brazilian Brazilian accounting standards 1 to 5, as well as the conceptual framework. And we are observing the PSAGiB conceptual framework. So we want to move to a different accounting framework here in Brazil. Well, the main bodies in Brazil that are conducting these reforms are the Council of Accountants or Institute of Chartered Accountants. This council is really important because they have a lot of competencies with the accounting professionals, so they can check if the accounting professional is following the rules, if they are not being pressured in order to make creative accounting and things like that. But unfortunately, the CFC is a little bit closer to the private sector than to the public sector accountants. And we would like this reality to be changed. We would like them to check if the accountants, the accountants that are working in the public sector are working as they were supposed to, following the rules and not responding to pressures, local pressures and things like that. And we also have another body that is really important in this process, that is the National Treasury. Why is it important? Because we have in the National Treasury, we have by law, we have the rule to set standards in order to create the same standards basis to consolidate the public sector accounts in order to make the whole of government accounts here in Brazil. We call this whole of government accounts here in Brazil Balanço do Setor Público Nacional, BSPN. It would be our WGA here in Brazil. So why use IPSAS? First of all, because it's the main international benchmark that we have. And we are part of the IPSAS. We are part of the board that sets the IPSAS, so we can make Brazil's voice heard there. We can discuss it, and we can share experiences. And which other option would we have? Could we use the American standards or even the IFRS standards? You mean the horizontal way? We were not sure of it. And so we tried not to recreate the wheel. We tried to use what was already in discussion internationally. And it's interesting because we are aware that IPSAS, they have a lot of problems and they do not answer all of our questions, but they still are a very important benchmark, not only for us, but as well as for IPSAS. Sometimes we go to Europe and we talk to them, and to OECD, they have their Peru symposium, and we go there and we discuss with them, so we share experiences. And we are really aware that IPSAS have many problems, but it is still a very important benchmark for us. And another thing that is interesting is that IPSAS shows that everything in accounting is linked. So in Brazil, accounting used to be a kind of isolated sector of the entity. And right now we're going through a very strong transformation where accounting touches everything in the organization. It touches the revenues such as taxation, it touches the inventory sector, it touches the sectors that are responsible for managing the property, plant and properties and equipments. Accounting touches the sectors that are responsible for judicial issues and things like that. And so we can provide an overall picture for the society or any stakeholder that is interested in accounting information in order to make decisions, in order to improve accountability, in order to improve transparency. So right now Brazil is kind of waking up and discovering that accounting does not work only to provide information to the Court of Accounts and only to answer to legal issues. We are discovering that accounting can be used to management purposes. So the strategy to improve public sector accounting in Brazil. First of all, we are observing the international accounting standards. But just as Caperchione said, we are not using it directly. We study that, we read that, we try to understand that, and after that we publish the Brazilian accounting standards or the convergent standards. And we do not take item by item or paragraph by paragraph from IPSAS. We make a lot of discussion and we try to see if it applies to our local reality. But unfortunately, IPSAS as well as Brazilian accounting standards, they're only part of the process. Here in Brazil, we have a very strong budgetary culture. Most people in public sector, they do not think in accounting, they think in budget execution. So we have to manage and balance this particularity of Brazil. In order to do that, we have an accounting handbook that is mandatory. So all the public sector has to follow this accounting handbook. And this accounting handbook shows the rules that are used in order to make the whole of government accounts. So every local government and central government, local government and regional government here in Brazil must follow this accounting handbook. This is a kind of a Bible for them. So the IPSAS, well, they are published by PSAGiB, that is a board of IFAC, BRGAAP, or the national standards by the Council of Accountants, and I am part of the board of the Council of Accountants. Pigato was with us a few months ago, but he had to leave, but we would like you to come back. Yeah, you are already invited to come back, but of course for your personal issues. And the National Treasury is responsible for publishing the accounting handbook in Brazil. And what are our goals? First of all, we would like to make Brazil international. But why international? Because it's not possible, just as Caperchione said, to truly compare the accounts from different governments. So we would like to follow the best practices, the international best practices, and we believe that this way we would be a little bit closer to the international panorama than we are right now. So this is one of our goals. We also would like to make the public sector bodies work together. We would like to involve them in under the same discussions and talking about the same language, the same accounting language. And we still do not have that in Brazil. But in Brazil, fortunately, the reality is a little bit more, I would say, common than in the UK. In the UK, they have much more freedom to follow, of course, not that much freedom, but they can follow different rules, different management ways. Here in Brazil, things are a little bit more equal. And we also would like to make this new public sector accounting framework collaborative. So we would like everyone to be part of it. And that's why the National Treasury allowed me to come here and to stay with you, because we would like to be a little bit closer to the academy. We would like to discuss. We would like you to be part of this process and to construct it with us. We would not like to be isolated, and we are aware that we do not have the truth, and we are aware that we must construct it with you, not only with you, but also with the managers, also with the Court of Accountants, also with every stakeholder that is interested in contributing to this process. So we would like also to approach the institutions. We would like everybody to have a voice in this process. And we also are aware that it will not come from night to day. I remember that once I was with an authority from the central government in France, and they told me that France is very resistant to adopting IPSAS. They are very critical about IPSAS. And they told us that only to change their IT system, it took something like 10 years. So to change a whole way of managing the public sector resources, it does not come from night to day. It takes time, and we are planning that to grow, to move slowly, but in a very strong and steady way. And we would like to break the paradigms. And one problem that we have here is that the public sector does not think according to accounting. They think according to budget execution. So they say, I do not have an expense if I had not committed budget. But we saw here in Brazil recently a lot of liabilities that were hidden because the government was assuming a lot of liabilities, but the government was not executing the budget, and the government was not giving the central government, where I work in, and I am not shy to say that, I think that we should show all the problems that we have, that we face in order to build solutions to them. And the government was hiding these liabilities. I would say that a little bit, something like over 100 billion reais of liabilities. And one way to hide it, it's not to show that it's linked to budget. So if there is no budget, then many people will believe that there are no liabilities. So anyway, so we have to break these paradigms in public sector in Brazil. The partial results. At first, we have 6 accounting standards published in 2016, the conceptual framework. We do not follow the IPSAS order. We are following Brazilian priorities, and one of them is how to account for taxes. It's really hard, and the taxes scenario here in Brazil is quite confusing, so it's really hard to do that. We're also working with revenue from exchange transactions, provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets. It's interesting because many branches here in Brazil, they are not interested, for example, in presenting their pensions liabilities. They do not want. The military, they do not want to do that because they say that if they do that, they could be put on the highlight so that the government would make reforms cutting a lot of benefits that they have. And it is a very, very strong liability, a very big one liability. Probably the biggest one that we have here in Brazil, pensions. We're also working with inventories as well as with service concession. Here it is similar to IPSAS 32, and that's a kind of a mirror of IFRIC 12. But it is really important because right now Brazil will probably start a very strong agenda with the private sector, and many services that are managed by the public sector will be moved to the private sector. So it is important to know how to account for these particular cases. And we also have releases for 2017 until 2020 for the new accounting standards convergent to IPSAS. That's the idea. We also have a convergence plan. So the local governments, the regional governments, and even the federal governments, they will not be asked to observe this from day to night. It will take a little bit, some years. And we will also use the system, the IT system that collect subnational governments' accounts in order to give us controls. What do I mean with that? We are aware that in Brazil, most governments, they do not have quality in their accounting material. I mean, accounting in the local, and yeah, they do not have maturity. Yeah, you could say that. but the quality of the accounting that is done by this professional is quite poor, really, really poor. For example, sometimes we receive balance sheets from local governments where assets, they do not match with liabilities. Sometimes some municipalities, they send us accounts where you see the same numbers in the balance sheet for different governments. The only thing that changes is the name of the municipality. And not even the accountant is different. Usually it's the same accountant or the same accounting office that provides this information. So we are aware that the accounting information here in Brazil is quite poor. And how are we going to change this reality? With the system that receives the balance sheets, we will make a lot of analysis. For example, if your asset is not equal to your liability, then we are aware that the accounting is poor. If the depreciation is bigger than your property, plant, and equipment, it does not make sense. And if you have inventories, but you have negative inventories, what does it mean to have negative inventories? So we're going to make a lot of analysis, and we're going to establish a ranking so that we will give transparency to the society, and we are going to show the quality of the accounting information that is being done in the local governments, regional government, as well as in the federal government in Brazil. And this way we would like to make them at least shy of the work that they do. I would not be comfortable in asking for a raise in the money I get from the state if my job was not being done according to the best practices, and it did not have quality. So we're going to try to make this in order to pressure them to make accounting a little bit better than it is right now. The legal and political strategies. Well, first we have here a set of laws and regulations. These are the main set for us in our federation. But I'm not going to take a lot of time in this. But we know here is in Portuguese because it's just copy and paste from the law. First of all, we understand that we still can make these changes even if the law does not change, because this law 4320 is with us since 1964, and it will probably change because there are many discussions right now in the Congress, so it will probably change. But what if it does not change? We understand that we can read this law in a different way. The law says that we have to work with our assets and liabilities. We have to present not only budgetary information. Let me see if I can turn it on. I think it's not working here. Oh yeah. We have to show our assets and liabilities, and we do not have to keep only budget in our minds. Even though liabilities and assets, even if they are not linked to budget, they must be presented. So we're just trying to read this law in a different way that it was done from 1964 to nowadays. And we also have the fiscal responsibility law, and this law shows that many governments, they have to show their financial information to society. We have the transparency law that changes the fiscal responsibility law with a lot of internet portals that shows how governments spend their money and things like that. And we are also trying to change this law in order to make CICONFI mandatory, because we would like to improve the quality of accounting that is being done in the subnational governments here in Brazil. Another interesting point is that CICONFI will not only ask for the numbers, it will ask for the balance sheet, so that we will be able to construct the financial statements. We will not receive, for example, the statement of financial position or even the statement of financial performance. We're going to receive the balance sheet, and we are going to use the accounts in order to build the statement. It's quite interesting because this way we will try to read what is behind the numbers. For example, Rio de Janeiro state, we get we call it, I will use a Portuguese expression, the RGF, that is one of the financial statements that the government has to send to the national treasury because of the gestão fiscal, because of the fiscal responsibility law. And if we look at this statement, we will see that at least in the financial statements, Rio de Janeiro state is the one that spent less money with civil servants in Brazil. It's okay, they only spend 33% of their income on a cash basis with expenses with civil servants. However, if we see the newspapers, if we watch TV, and if we ask to Ricardo here, we will see the reality that the government is not being able to pay the civil servants. So we have to find a way to make numbers trustable. And this is one of the ways that we will use in order to do that. And we have other laws and regulations, but I will not go deep in that. We also have a lot of discussion groups, such as the technical groups, because our strategy is not isolated. We want to discuss everything. So I have to account for pensions. I have to account for taxes. How do I do that? Observing the international standards, the local regulation, as well as our laws and our experiences. So we discuss this with the Federation, and we do that in order to build our handbook, the handbook that is mandatory observed by each government in our Federation. Okay. We also have a very important document here that was issued by the Finance Ministry and shows that we should observe the international accounting standards. So it gave us a lot of strength in order to face people that did not share the same thoughts and things like that. But right now we have at least the excuse to say that we are following the rules, so that we must do that, because just as in many places in Europe, these standards, they are not, they are not above critics here in Brazil. The evolution. So we will try to do these reforms, even if the laws and regulations, they do not change. Even if we still have to work with the law 4320. But there are many discussions happening right now in the Congress in order to change that law. And we are taking part in that discussions, and we are trying to make these discussions get a little bit closer to the accounting, accounting, public sector accounting reforms that are happening right now in Brazil. And the main laws here are the PLP 295, the old one 229, that is right now being discussed in the Chamber of Deputies in the House of Representatives here in Brazil, as well as the 257 that is changing the fiscal responsibility law, and we will try to use these laws as instruments in order to make the use of SICONFI mandatory. This is one of the ways we're thinking to do that. We're also trying to bring interinstitutional support to public sector accounting reforms. So we are trying to talk to the Federation and show them that accounting is not isolated. It should be linked to many other areas in the public sector. We would like accounting to be used for decision-making purposes, and we are trying to change this paradigm in Brazil, because they only use that to answer to usually Supreme Audit Courts or court of accountants and things like that. They do not use it for any strategic purposes. And of course to improve accountability, transparency and accountability as well. Well, technical issues. The process did not start yesterday. It started in something like 2007, 2008. But it was really hard to change this reality. At first, we worked on the same chart of accounts for the whole federation in Brazil. And Brazil is a very big country, it's a huge country. We have 200 million people. We have over 5,500 municipalities and different realities, different cultures. And some of them were a little bit better in adopting this new chart of accounts, but many of them were not. So we saw many differences in the federation. And I remember the case of the state of Santa Catarina, where the state was had already done their job, and they are a positive benchmark for accounting reforms here in Brazil. But the local governments, they were not ready. So I remember that the local government, they talked to us in order to postpone the deadlines, and we were sensible to their position. But then the state government said, no, you cannot postpone it, because how will I explain it to my governor? Because the governor used a lot of resources, a lot of financial resources in order to observe this deadline. And now if you postpone that, how will I explain that to the governor, to the Secretary of Finance? How will I do that? So it was quite challenging for us. And in many moments, the National Treasury changed the deadline. So we had a lot of laws, a lot of regulations that would only make things a little bit confuser than they were, and it was not really organized. But then we just had one that cleared all of them, all of the other ones are not working anymore, and we have only one. So this one shows the deadline for the implementation of the chart of accounts of the federation. Here we have the financial statements, so they have to observe our handbook. Also accounting for specific procedures such as public-private partnerships, such as Fundeb, that is an education regulation here in Brazil. Here, our budget, how to account for budget, because we have here in Brazil accounting for budget proposals. We have double entry bookkeeping that is used to execute budget and things like that, and also to consolidate. And for here, we would say that IPSAs are inside this part here. We have a different deadline because it is really complex. And this deadline was set by this regulation here, Portaria 548 de 2015, okay? So we started working on a clear implementation plan that was discussed with the Federation. It was put in public, it was open to everyone in order to criticize, to make a lot of comments. And so it was discussed with different stakeholders. It had clear deadlines until 2024 in order to adopt the Brazilian standards and the Brazilian handbook, accounting handbook. This document will be a reference for governments so they can make their planning in their own speed. They say, okay, we have to account for intangible assets until 2018. So this year it will be a little bit hard because we have the World Cup here and we will have to spend a lot of efforts in the World Cup, but why not next year? So they can set their own schedule using the biggest picture as a benchmark, as a deadline. And we are also following the international best practices as discussed with PSAGiB. So usually they tell the countries, the governments to follow an implementation plan and to set it and to discuss it, and we are trying to do that. And we are trying to explain each deadline. Why are we going to account for taxes first instead of intangible assets? So we have to explain our choices, and we're trying to do that. And we also have different deadlines for different sizes of governments. Smaller governments will have a little bit more time, 2 years more, in order to adopt this these accounting procedures. Here we have, for example, the deadline for the states. This is the deadline, and we have here assets and liabilities. So, for example, taxes. Taxes is, let me see, these are not taxes. Oh yeah. Yeah, here, taxes. So they have to observe the accounting standards in 2020 to account for taxes. And so they can plan themselves on the best way to do that. Okay. And the convergence plan is also, it is also built according to the accounting, public sector accounting handbook, so everything is quite linked and it is very well linked. So everything is working fine. Anyway, next steps and expectations. First, we know that we have to be strong in 3 different sectors. The standards must be strong, they must be discussed, but we also have to adjust the IT system as well as to train the staff in order to learn how to work with this new accounting reality. The first step is being done right now is to adjust the standards, is to observe a very important and respected benchmark internationally that are IPSAS. And here I would like to say that we are aware that IPSAS, they have a lot of problems, but they are still the best benchmark that we have internationally. So the governments, they may work with their own implementation plans in order to put that standards and procedures working. And of course that we would recommend them to anticipate this implementation. The IT systems, they must be adjusted as well. So they must set a lot of validation rules in order to make the accounting information trustable. We also, as I told you before, want to make a ranking of accounting information quality so that we're going to show who is doing a good job and who is not. And this way, nothing more than transparency will be used to make people a little bit shy if they have a poor accounting information, so that we expect them to try to improve their accounting information by their own. And we also want to use what we call matriz de saldos contábeis. So we want to receive the balance sheets instead of receiving the financial statements, because we would like to build the numbers. We would like to know what is behind the numbers, and we do not have it nowadays. And staff training, we have a lot of seminars, we have a lot of efforts in order to talk to the Federation. We are aware that Brazil is quite huge and we would not be able to do that by ourselves. So we with the Council of Accountants, we try to train people that will train other people. And we usually go to many places in Brazil 5 times a year. We stay 1 week there, and many people there help to train the professionals, the accounting professionals, so that they can solve their doubts and have a little of support in order to know how to do and know how to deal with this new accounting reality. And well, we also want to support the public sector stakeholders. We would like them to review all the procedures that they follow right now in order to adapt it to this new accounting framework. So it happened in the National Treasury. We had there, for example, a lot of subsidies that were given to a lot of companies, and they were only observing budgetary issues, and after the finance ministry gave us his support, Joaquim Levy gave us his support, we got inside each area and we analyzed all the programs, all the government programs that were there, and we modeled it in a different way such that we could account for it according to the best international practices. And so we kind of opened the window and we discovered billions of liabilities that were not accounted in the public sector, in the federal government. Well, we want to work together in order to share experiences and in order to build something together. We want also to reveal all the IT systems and to make them integrated, because unlike France, for example, that went through a system change really strong there, they had a local system and then they started using SAP from Germany, an ERP that is quite common in the private sector. And they started using this ERP in the public sector as well. And this ERP is very well integrated. But here in Brazil, at least in the central government, in the federal government, the systems are not integrated. So I have one system that is CIAF that controls the budget and the financial management, but we have another system that controls property, plant and equipment, and we have FEARP system that controls taxes and transfers, and we have something like dozens of different systems that are not natively connected. So it is also a challenge, because how can I make accounting timely and useful if it does not receive the information by the time that the things happen? So we're trying to work in that as well, and it's quite challenging, but I believe that we are moving in the right direction. If there is a right direction, we are at least trying to move to this direction. The benefits is that we expect to be integrated to the best practices in the future. It's really hard to say what are the best practices, but we are trying to get a little bit closer to PSAGiB. We are aware that they have a lot of challenges and a lot of critics, but they are a benchmark for us, and we are trying to construct something together with them. And we understand that Brazil is not a public sector accounting benchmark, but why not have this dream in the future? I think that we could make this dream come true. Why not? We must try. And we also would like to provide society an overall picture of our assets and liabilities, and I believe that we are improving in that, because a few years ago our balance sheets were, well, bullshit. Yeah, they were not useful. They were not useful. They were just, here in Brazil we have an expression, they were just to the Englishman see, so that everything is okay there. And we also want to improve transparency and make a better use of public resources. So why not use cost accounting in the public sector? And to use cost accounting, we must have an accrual accounting framework consolidated here in the public sector. So we're trying to build the basis to move towards that direction. And, well, that's it for now. I think that I took 1 hour exactly, something like that. And I'm quite happy and glad to be here. And if you have any questions, feel free to make them in Portuguese and English. If André allows me, I can, well, it depends on you. So I would like to thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Mangualde. Really thank you. And we can now start open discussion and reflections. I know Professor Eugenio Caperchione has a question from... Okay.
I have to look for it.
Okay, then we can start with Ricardo or Ricardo if you want. I can... Yes. Yes.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and hopefully good morning and good night for the international audience. I hope we have international audience. It's really interesting to have this kind of discussion. It seems to me the Brazilian development of public sector financial reforms follow an agenda of fiscal pressure and fiscal stimuli, to quote Klaus Luder model of contingence model. Since Brazil became independent, we were talking last night, we assume a debt of Portugal that made the states that were provinces in Brazil responsible for amortizing this debt with the English bankers, more specifically Rothschild Bank. So we have several experiences of reform, not with this comprehensive framework of accounting, but in terms of budgetary information. We faced several, at least 3 reforms in Brazil. In the independence, then in 1922, in 1964. And we developed a culture of budgetary accounting very strong, that's still in laws and even behind the classifications of assets and liabilities. We have the old structure of controlling balances and fiscal ratios and results that are important for monitoring the debt and the capacity of Brazil paying its liabilities. Well, I was very pleased to listen the Professor Caperchione explanation of European attempt to harmonize their accounting systems. We are aware the differences between cameralistic countries, countries that follow code law, and countries that don't follow code law system, legal systems. Brazil has a blend of things very interesting. We are a federation with theoretically municipalities that are local jurisdiction, very uniform, different from the US, for example. We have only one kind of local government, states, so we are a federation of states, municipalities, federal district, and the central government as well. To me, it's very clear. We had not this time, but in 1998, the huge fiscal problem that opened space for central government to coordinate the change by means of taking the responsibility of developing the whole of government accounts. They give power to Treasury to coordinate these efforts. So, despite of this fact, we still have some general budget rule in Brazil, and subnational governments theoretically could have their own framework if they like. Of course, it would be costly, and they would not follow this situation. So, in 2010, maybe I'm wrong. President Lula signed a decree where he said, it says we follow international accounting standards.
It was our finance of the Ministry of Finance.
You need a mic.
Guido Mantega did that.
Okay. Of course, you presented we are developing our specific standards. It would be impossible to follow strictly international accounting standards. We are adapting as soon as we need these adaptations. But and we explained that we have a handbook that take advantage and use the standards to organize this information from subnational governments and the whole federation information. My guess is, perhaps I'm wrong, we are not talking in international harmonization at this time. We are in an early stage of building and recognizing, measuring assets, liabilities, measuring the equity of the whole country, the public sector. But at this time, it seems to me, we are not able to allow subnational governments or accountants, the profession, to make estimates and judgments in an accounting policies. I mean, we have something weaker than harmonization. We have something more, I resist to say uniformity, but at this stage in Brazil, it seems to me something very necessary to develop a new culture.
Yeah.
As a scholar, a professor in university, I recognize how difficult it is to teach public sector accounting, to explain people that are used to commercial accounting, these things. But I just would like to make these remarks, and I don't know if you are comfortable with this, if you agree with me in this respect, but it's what I would like to say at this moment. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Begato. Would like to answer? Or
No, it's okay. I agree with you. I believe that Brazil has, well, all the governments here, central, local, and regional governments, they share the same regulation. They use the same regulation. They follow the same regulation. They follow the same laws, 4320, fiscal responsibility law. They follow the same accounting standards, the same accounting procedures, the handbook, as well as the national accounting standards. But of course that they do not have the same expertise, so it's really hard for them to learn it quickly in order to make a quality accounting, well, in order to work with a quality. So we are aware that we are still in the early stages, just like you said, and we still have to walk a lot in order to be a benchmark for, at least for Latin America. So we're trying to do that, and we are using tools in order to do that, such as Conf and also the transfers that we make to them. We for example, could tell them that we would only make the non-mandatory transfer if they have at least a kind of a grade in an accounting quality ranking. So we are discussing right now many ways in order to make accounting better in the country, but we are aware that it's really hard to say that someone in Brasilia or some branch in Brasilia, some office, will change the accounting reality in the country. It's not true. So we have to put everybody here working in the same direction. And that's why we have a lot of events such as the Secofem, that it's a training event that tries to make accounting a little bit closer, or these accounting reforms a little bit closer to the professional that works in the many different places here in Brazil. So we believe in this strategy. We are aware that it may be adjusted throughout time, but we believe that in the long term, in the long run, we're going to be at least partially successful. I believe that things will be a little bit better. So, but we, of course, that we can revisit and take a critical view and make adjustments if you give us an information that maybe make us reflect and view something different that we did not view before. That's why we're trying to talk to everyone, to everybody, and this is one of the reasons why I'm here. I can learn with Caperchione experience, and I can also talk to the academics and take your point of view to the work that is being done right now.
May I report a question of an international colleague? Okay. So I will read a question with greetings from Ron Hodges in Birmingham. Okay, no, because we are in a community and we know each other, maybe even if we come from other continents. So Ron Hodges, an emeritus professor in Birmingham, is probably attending this, looking on the internet, but he had also an official engagement. So he asked me to raise this question to Mr. Mangualdi. Bruno, are you finding that there is much opposition, or in any case there is lack of interest in the process of convergence to Ipsos in your country? So is there a lot of opposition, or is there anyway lack of interest to convergence to Ipsos? And if there is opposition, is this opposition happening at central, state, or local government level, or all three levels?
Well, right now I would like to look to Ron Hodges' faces, but he's not here, so I will look to the camera and congratulate Ron Hodges. I miss you a lot. You were very important for during my period in Birmingham, and I would like to thank you to be in contact with us, even though you're not right here right now. But yeah, we are facing opposition, of course, and the main opposition is with the political stakeholders. They do not want, or they're not kind of interested in public sector accounting reforms. They do not want to show all the liabilities, to open the window and show the reality to the society, because many of them did a lot of things that they could be blamed for that, and they could be found guilty for that. And right now we're facing a huge financial crisis here in Brazil, and this financial crisis, of course, that it had many international, I would say, influences, but this crisis was mainly created here. And this crisis the responsible for it was the government, or is the government that spent much more than it should, and right now we are opening the window and discovering many liabilities that were not accounted for. And for them, it's not interesting to show that to society. The rating agencies have already discovered that, of course, that they have a lot of problems, but they downgraded Brazil. The three big ones, they downgraded Brazil, and we also, with some support from a recent finance ministry here in Brazil, we were allowed to go inside many programs that are managed by the National Treasury, and we could discover that many liabilities that were not accounted for. So I would say that in all three levels of governments we have resistances. We have people that are not interested in making things change. But I would say also that usually the professionals, the accountancy professionals, they are interested in promoting these reforms. So we usually call that this is the silent revolution that is going on in Brazil. We would like these technical changes to consolidate in such a way that it will be a kind of political proof. It doesn't matter if I am the political or Pigato is the political. Accounting will move and will do what has to be done. will show the assets, the liabilities, the revenues, the expenses, and as it should be presented. And we believe that we are moving in the right direction. However, it will take time and it will take many years in order to become a reality. But we are really happy with the direction that is going on right now. Even though the country is facing a huge financial crisis, I believe that right now accounting is a little bit more important for the country, and the main stakeholders, or at least few of them, are understanding that accounting is part of the solution and not part of the problem.
Yeah? Okay. Thank you, Professor Eugenio. Thank you, Bruno, for your presentations. I have many thoughts about the presentations you made, but I will address some questions right now on a specific topic, and then if I have time, I would like to come back to discuss another perspective. The first topic that I would like to address is in regard to harmonization. As we began to just identify it, what we are having here in Brazil is inside country harmonization.
That's true.
Trying to harmonize local governments, states, and central government. While Professor Eugenio, on the other hand, although he presented that there are three types of harmonizations, like vertical, horizontal, and international harmonization, his main research interest, is on international comparative or the international harmonization phenomena, if I'm not wrong. The question what my concern is on which kind of harmonization or comparison are we talking about? A formal harmonization or a substantive harmonization? What we have here, every local government, more than 5,000, every state, 26 plus federal district, and the central government might implement the Treasury's handbook.
Sure. Yeah.
Might. That's a formal. At the end of the day, we do not know how they actually apply
That's true.
the handbook.
Yeah.
And as you just said, the Treasury is building a tool inside CCONF to make a check. I cannot say audit,
Yeah.
but highlight
Yeah.
big mistakes. If they are making such huge big mistakes, it's because they are not substantively implementing it. Just formally, like a discourse, we are implementing, but not really true. When you go back to international comparisons, we see that some countries adopt cash basis, modified cash, modified accrual, or accrual for budgeting, for accounting in central, regional, or local government. And at the end of the day, again, I wonder, when we present those research, are we focusing on the rules, the handbooks that those local governments, regional governments, central governments should implement? Or are we actually analyzing the quality of the implementation of those accounting practices? Because we can see on a table that 5 among 14 countries adopt accrual accounting for accounting purpose, not budgeting. But when we go deeper in such an analysis, we could identify that some of those countries implement accrue accounting, meaning that they do account for revenues from exchange transactions based on accrual, but the revenue from non-exchange transactions, it's not accrual actually, but formally accrual. Or they do account for such revenue, those tax collections, the right to collect tax based on accrual, but they do not adjust that for bad debt collections, and so on and so forth. So the level of accruability, I don't know if I can say that word, is not comparable at all. Talking about that, I think that the notes to the financial statements is hugely important, although very difficult to analyze, either internationally, because one thing is to take a look on the structure of the financial statements and the balances that they present. Another is going deep inside the notes or the accounting practices that they say they implement when they write down the notes of financial statements. And in an international perspective agenda, language would be quite a huge challenge on going through the notes. On the other hand, here in Brazil, CIGAR, we can download on an Excel spreadsheet I would say the chart of accounts with the respective balances.
That's true.
That's what you said. You used the term balance sheet, not the statement of financial position, but the balance sheet proper set. But the notes are not there available. So that is a concern that I have when I intend to use data from CIGAR for researching here in Brazil. And finally, in the same main topic that I'm trying to address, is the auditing. What do we have about auditing outside internationally and here in Brazil? Do the courts of accounts here in Brazil actually audit the financial statements, including the patrimonial, contabilidade patrimonial? I guess Eugenio, you understand what I'm saying. Or only the budgeting, compliance with budget, if they expand what were allowed to expand, and the fiscal responsibility thresholds. And again, going back to the international arena in that auditing regard, I wonder is there any of those European countries where we have properly said account, the auditing of those accounting statements, or statements, or only mainly compliance with the local law? Do they are in any of those countries is auditing only performed by the Corte de Conte, by the Court of Accounts, or as well as by the auditing firms, certified auditors, or the markets as well? So my point was on what are we talking about, harmonization, how reliable it is, and mainly on that regard.
Thank you, Ricardo. I will try to answer maybe not all your questions, because I'm not even sure I catch everything. But I mean, we are having a dialogue, okay? And so, well, the first point I want to mention is, well, I'm not sure that international harmonization is more relevant. My position is that I assume that a lot of authors, a lot of institutions are claiming that international harmonization requires to adopt IPSAS, to adopt EPSAS, to do this and that, and in reality, I don't know whether you are aware of what is happening politically in Europe and what are the tensions in that continent these days. One thing which is common in many countries is a refusal of the European institutions. There are big concerns about the real acceptance of the European institutions in the countries. And one of the reasons for this is that whatever when something is proposed at national level which does not fit the expectations of people, where there is some reform which requires either more taxation or some more checks, or where there are some problems, the politicians are very able in telling this is required by Europe, this is a need of Europe, this is what the European Union wants. So the reaction of the people is that we don't want this kind of Europe. Okay, so this is one issue. Politicians, many people are trying to say we do reform of accounting because of Europe, because it's international harmonization, but this is not in reality what they have in mind. They have in mind probably something which is national. And I buy the fact, I accept that inside a country, the country should decide what is relevant for it. And so I accept, I'm not against the fact that the main interest of a country is its own interest. So international harmonization can help, it can be pursued, it can be an objective, you can work for it, but it has not to be against your own interest. So this just to discuss about what is more important. Then you had a question about accounting systems. I presented different situations, and you asked me whether I'm talking about what should be produced as documents, or am I talking of a quality of documents? So in other words, you are asking me, Eugenio, you speak about cash basis, accrual basis, etc., but what is the quality of this different document? Well, my answer is that when I write, so when one of the authors of the chapters of the book says that in her country the state level, the regional level have accrual, cash or whatever, they are making a judgment, and they see that what the documents are produced, what documents are put in place. If you ask me, but if you tell, Eugenio, maybe these documents are of a lower quality, or, as you were telling, maybe these documents are not all the same when we speak about accrual, and I am not repeating what you said, there are different ways. Well, if you say this, you are only reinforcing what I was saying about the difficulty to build an international harmonization, because even in the case in which we had only one label, say accrual, for the budget, for the reports, for everything, this would not mean that this is really the same story. This is what Christopher Knox is saying about private sector accounting. Okay. Then you have an issue about culture. Well, I'm not sure I want to answer to this now, but well, if I have a minute, and then I will stop answering in this round. It can be debated if accrual is better than cash. It can be debated what culture means, what is the good culture of public sector accounting. But if I can something to this respect, I think that in the public sector, so I'm speaking for Europe, but maybe I'm trying to speak also for your country here, Brazil. I think that the important thing, so the culture, the good culture, would not be just to copy-paste what is done in the private sector. Because this is not culture, this is just not recognizing that the public sector has some specificities, that public institutions are not private companies, the way they are financed are different, citizens are a member of a community, there is a reason to have a budget, and public sector is not at all less relevant and less also acceptable socially than private institutions. So culture is to recognize that if we are discussing about the public sector, it has a history, a tradition, aims, and we have to manage it the best possible way for the good of our citizens. When this is accepted, then technically it may be possible, I can concede, I can buy, then accrual is what we have to follow, maybe only because it is now the fashion, but maybe also because it gives additional information with respect of cash. So cash gives one set of info, but with accrual we know the debt, we know the liability, so we can judge whether the public institution is living within its means. So we make it perfect. If this is the case, then I speak for Europe, and I repeat, I speak also for Brazil, then it is important that the system is designed considering the peculiarities, the people are formed in those who already work in the public sector, and students and PhD students must be formed to not only to private sector accounting, but to private sector accounting applied to public sector, to management in public sector, to, as you have the label here, public sector governance, to specificities of public sector. We have to fight maybe some battles in the universities to affirm that studying public sector management issues is not less relevant than studying private sector accounting issues. And so when this is done, we have done a good cultural work.
Well, just to answer part of your questions, Ricardo, you asked about the notes. Why does not the CIGAR system collect the notes? Well, basically because CIGAR main reason to exist was to receive the accounts or the balance sheet from the public sector governments in Brazil once a year in order to follow the fiscal responsibility law and consolidate these accounts in the Brazilian WGA, the whole of government accounts in Brazil. That was the main reason to have CIGAR, and the second reason was to collect the fiscal responsibility law financial statements such as RGF and RREO. So this is why we do not have these notes, but why not in the future? We have to study that. CIGAR is also a technology driven by XBRL. We're using, it's unique in the world for the public sector. And XBRL, it's really interesting to collect data, but we're not sure if it's quite useful to collect notes. We have to try to apply the XBRL technology in order to fill notes and things like that. But we're not working in that now, right now. For example, the notes from the municipality where my father was born, Ressaquinha, they're not quite important for the WGA here. But how am I going to analyze it? and take an overall picture of the notes in the public sector. So unlike the numbers that are really easily manageable, the notes, they are not that easily manageable. So it's another challenge, and maybe in the future, but not right now. And you also asked about you also said that we have handbooks here, we have accounting standards, but we are not sure if the governments are following them. And that's true, we're not sure, and I would say that if I would have to bet, I bet that most of them are not. And I would bet a lot of money. So I am not afraid of losing money, you know. But we understand that the Court of Accounts, they do not have the same way of thinking and behaving. They have different people there, and they are a little bit more, I would say, sensible to different pressures. And sometimes, for example, Rio Grande do Sul state, a very important state here in Brazil, they say that retired people are not part of the expenses with personnel. And the Court of Accounts, they say it's okay. Why do they do that? Because if they account for the retired people as part of their personal expenses, they would go over the limits. So they found a way to justify that, and the Court of Accounts, they just accepted it. So we have to change this reality. We have to make the rules unique for all of them, and we must make the Federation follow the rules, and we must open the window and see the true picture of what is going on in our Federation. And sometimes people are trying to hide a lot of problems that we cannot avoid in the long term. That's what we're seeing right now in Brazil. The bill is here, and someone will have to pay for it. And you are paying right now. And I will also pay for that. I will have to retire a little bit older than I thought I would. So I believe that right now we have to try to make things work as following the best guidelines and following the best rules that we have available, even if it will not show a very handsome picture, a very beautiful picture. Maybe they will open the window, and instead of seeing, I don't know, maybe Hugh Grant, they will see Bruno Mangualde. But anyway, we have to face the reality. And one way to face the reality is to show the right numbers and not to hide anything. And we have to, in our strategy, we would like to put the Court of Accounts inside of it. And many of them are making a lot of agreements with the National Treasury in order to share information, so that, for example, the local government will not have to send information to the Court of Accounts and to the National Treasury and to the Health Ministry, to the Education Ministry. They will only send it to CIGAR. CIGAR will process the information and distribute it. It makes things easier for the municipality. It makes, we will have only one source of information, and we will have to face only one challenge, that is to make that information reliable, instead of making all the different pieces of information that it sends to different institutions reliable. So we believe that this strategy may work, but Brazil is really a very challenging country, but we have to try, and we are trying.
If you have some questions, okay. I had one question also from Brasilia and Rio de Janeiro.
Hi Mangualde. I'm working in a project in a representative government in Brazil, and one of my difficulties is Actually, we have MCASP, which is the main reference we have to do the convergence here in Brazil. So the CFC published the 5 accounting rules which must be applied. And I try to face in it because we have a reference MCASP and we have these new accounts of CFC. And we know we have some differences, between the 2 rules, and the others will be published in the future. What's your recommendation to deal with it in a convergence project?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and it is part of our discussion there in Brazil. We understand that the convergent accounting standards, they are something that we would like to achieve in the future, but we are aware that it is not possible to implement it in the short run, in the short term. So we use the handbook, the MCASP, as a filter to what should be observed by the Federation. Not only because the public sector accounting standards are discussed by a small group of people, but also because everything that is inside the MCASP was presented in advance to the technical groups that go to Brazil twice a year, something like 300 people in each meeting, in order to discuss which rules will they follow, how they will account for a program A, B, or C. So you have, if there is a very clear answer, you have to follow the MCASP, and MCASP will try to be each more closer to the Brazilian standards that are closer, a little bit similar to the international accounting standards. So this is, you have to follow, right? Let me see here. Right, what we have here. Yeah. First, observe MCASP. Oh, sorry.
We turned it off, but
It's getting old.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah, okay. You have to observe MCASP because MCASP shows not only which aspects of the Brazilian standards are being observed at first, but also because it brings the budgeting perspective of that. And the local standards, as well as the international standards, they do not deal with budget issues. And the MCASP deals with our rules, our reality, and it tries to look at the same time to the international perspective through the Brazilian convergence standards. So if you have to follow one thing, is to follow the handbook, the MCASP. I also have one question for Eugenio, but it can be the last one.
Our colleague Claudia Cruz from University Federal of Rio de Janeiro sent to us 2 questions, but I think you answered. And Diana, also our colleague from UNB, University of Brasilia, sent a question to Eugenio, or both of you. The literature show or said that the important benefit of the adoption of international standards is to enhance the comparability and to reduce the information asymmetry, accounting information asymmetry. Then, are IPSAs in some way a challenge to those objectives, is the question.
So the question is, are IPSAs against comparability?
EPSAs against comparability and account information asymmetry reduction.
if there is the adoption of a set of standards, despite all my reservations, it is clear that the larger the number of those adopting the same set of standards, the higher the comparability will be. And so I have reservation and doubts on the relevance of comparability. For instance, I would say that having comparable accounts comparable financial reports is less relevant for a citizen than having a well-managed public institution, because financial reports are a proxy of a good management. But I mean, people like to have the roads functioning, the hospitals working, etc. Then, we are here a number, maybe 30 people in the room, and 70 people or 100 people on the web if they are still here. Okay, large number. Okay, 150 people. Wonderful. Brazil has 200 million inhabitants. What are we? We are nothing. People, individual people, ordinary people, they cannot be interested in accounting. Maybe, yes, they look to television, they say, I see that the prefeita has problem in the city, but they cannot, because everyone has his job, his occupation, etc., etc. So democracy is also accepting that someone else is doing things. When do you become very careful? When you don't trust, when you see problems, etc. So the important thing would have to have a good administration, and of course technically accounting is important. And these days maybe accrual accounting and IPSAS, etc. are the standard. Okay, shall we do it? And we have some benefits, comparability, but it is clear this is not the most relevant thing. Having said this, are EPSAs a challenge? So are EPSAs against, if I understand the questions? No, they are not. I don't think that EPSAs are the best solution. And to be open, I am now I also have doubts whether EPSAs really will be produced, because they are still not there. They have to be produced and put in place by 2025. If I had to bet, I would bet that in 2025 European countries will follow IPSAS, International Public Sector Accounting Standards, of International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, and not EPSAS. But anyway, so no, they are not a challenge, but they are not there yet. I hope this is the answer.
Good. Well, I first congratulate both of you for the brilliant presentation. It's a very arid subject. It's a very complex one, but our mission is to communicate it correctly. I remember a quote from Mário Covas. He told once that if you give the people the information, they will take the right decision. And I truly believe it. Our mission is to turn complex ideas into simple ideas. It's hard, but it's not impossible, of course. I've recently been elected as a city councillor for Ribeirão Preto, and I'm an economist. I'm a representative of the Council of Economists of Ribeirão Preto. My colleague is not here, from CRC, the Walter, vou puxar a orelha dele, ele está aqui. And we've been talking about it for a long time, about IFRS, but IPSAS is quite recent. And I see myself as with a mission. I engage myself in trying to turn the chamber into the most transparent chamber of the whole country. I've been talking to a couple of friends that recently been elected here, and we're not a best example of good management here at Ribeirão Preto. We have a national projection as a definitely horrible management. And I've been telling them that we first must start giving the example inside our house, the chamber. So I've been studying and talking to a lot of friends, accountants, and here, and to try to understand what it means to be the most transparent chamber of counselors, political counselors in the country. And it comes with transparency, controls, process mapping, what else? And accountability. And I'm trying to make a project to implement here, to build it. And by the way, I ask the support of you guys. I don't know, I haven't met you before, but I studied here as when this house here, this place where we are right now, was just a bug room. That we didn't have anything of it. I'm from 1995, and so I'm very happy to try to implement it here because I see there's a place to do that. And one of the things that I ask you is, for example, is there a list of cities in the country that could serve as a benchmark that I could establish contact with them to understand what to be implemented in the chamber? I believe that it's easier than implemented in the executive power because it's too big. But if we could implement in the chamber, it's smaller, much smaller than the executive power. The legislative power, if we could implement IPSAS, I don't know if it's possible, I believe so, that if we could implement IPSAS in the chamber, and I don't know if there's an example in the country, in the state of São Paulo, that a chamber that already adopted IPSAS before. I don't know. I'd like to know if there's a list of good practice cities that adopted these good practices that we could make contact to them and start making a good chain work. And so that's my question. I'd like to see how can I start. I start working in January the 1st, and I'd like to do that as a first step in the chamber. If we adopt good governance, good public governance practices, I think we could start giving the example for the mayor that will assume in January. That's it. A list of good practices, good cities. So I could I could go after them and say, hey, what you're doing over there, I'd like to repeat it in Ribeirão Preto. Could you give me a list of examples of people that I could reach, make contact? That's it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's true. Well, thank you for your question. It's really hard to find a good benchmark here in the public sector in Brazil. I believe that not even the federal government was a great benchmark. We are improving, and I think that we are becoming a benchmark. We, I mean, the federal government. But if I could name someone, I would name the state of Santa Catarina. I know how they work, and they are really serious about what they are doing, and they are trying to at least to make the government a little bit closer to not only the people, the society, but also the investors. And I remember once when I was in contact with the head accountant of the state, and that he presented me with just one sheet of paper. Hey, Mangualde, take a look at it. And I just took a look and I saw the main points of the state, the main financial issues, and it was even written in English. And I told him, but what do you want to do with that? You have a sheet of paper with financial information on your state in English, and we Brazilians sometimes we cannot even understand what is written in Portuguese, and you have it in English. And he told me, oh, Mangualde, you are not aware of what we are trying to do. We are trying to sell the state to investors, to international investors. We would like them to put their money here, and they want information in this way. They want an overall picture in order to make decisions, and that's what we're trying to do. And they also follow the handbook of accounting, our handbook of accounting, in a very interesting way. And it's interesting because sometimes I can go inside the CConf systems, and sometimes I do that, and I just download their spreadsheet with accounting information, and with just one quick look I can see who's following at least one or two aspects, two issues, 2 points of the accounting handbook and who is not. And I always use them. I always use the state of Santa Catarina as a great benchmark. And sometimes I use the city where my father was born as a very bad benchmark, because they do not even send their accounts to us. We do not receive their financial information. Or, for example, the state of Alagoas, go there and try to see if they are doing depreciation, if they are doing provisions, if they are accounting for provisions, if they are accounting for education, Fundeb, in the right way that is presented in the accounting handbook. They're not. And I'm not only talking about the state, I'm also talking about the capital, the main city there, Maceió, and the main municipalities there. So it is really hard to find a benchmark, but if you want just one benchmark, I would say the state of Santa Catarina. And if you want, we can put you in contact with the main people there, the main people from their staff. And they are really very easy people to deal with, and they will be very helpful to you. And, well, according to professional councils, not even the CFC is a good benchmark yet, but we should change this reality. Anyway, I would suggest you to be in contact, get in touch with the state of Santa Catarina.
I have no idea, of course, of benchmarks in your country, and but I have one thing to say here. And so, of course, it is not very easy to lead the game from, if I understand the chamber, the legislative, and not the executive, because I mean the executive is in charge of managing and also of preparing the accounts. But so if you allow me just to consider, say, the municipality as a whole, okay, and I modify your question and I say it in this way: what are the chances for a municipality to be really accountable to citizens and really transparent? Okay, executive, legislative, whatever. Well, my answer would be if you decide to be transparent, so if you decide is probably if those who are in charge, those who have the power, so the executive, those who have been elected as the mayor and his government. I say this because the opposition parties, normally, of course, they are transparent in the sense that they criticize, but they are the opposition and they are the minority. So the good way to be transparent, to my eyes, would be that those who are in charge, so the executive, says, citizens, now we want to be transparent, we want to communicate correctly the situation of our municipality, which means, one, of course, we prepare the accounts coherently to the laws. If this interesting thing you were saying of your offices or looking to what is bad would comply also what is good, and so if the treasury could signal what is well done, this would be an incentive. But then to be transparent means to explain to the citizens what has been done well or not. It would be to engage yourself, the administration, to set clear objectives for the following year or for the 3 years to come, and ensure that measures are taken, so there is a metric which measures this to the end of the year or the 3 years, and if it will be on roads, education, hospitals, libraries, green areas, etc., etc., on whatever issues, and the municipality will report, I have met the target, I have not met the target, this has been done well, this has been done not well, even if this is at first against the immediate interest of that executive, because that executive would like to say we have done everything well. But this is not a good way to be transparent. So if you want to make, again, a cultural operation, you do that, and if you do this, maybe if you involve also those who are not in the majority, you involve them in giving an oversight. Maybe you publish a report, a small report, a popular report of 5 pages, 6 pages, or maybe 4 pages, okay? One sheet, 4 pages every 6 months with the results, and you give also room to the opposition parties to say how they see things. Okay, if you do this kind of thing, maybe at the beginning it will be very complicated, but it is a different way of communicating to citizens. And I think the population would like to have this, because it would be a different relation with their representatives.
Okay, Mangualde, would like to make that question? I don't know, but
my
he
question
said,
will
yeah.
be to Mr. Caperchione. I remember that when I was studying public sector accounting and making the literature review for my dissertation, one of the main aspects that kind of turned on a light in my head was budget, because here in Brazil we have, right now we're moving towards accrual accounting, but we do not have accrual budgeting as well. And no, we do not have. We have a budget here that would be a kind of cameralistic budget. It has many particularities, but we usually follow the budget. We usually register in the budget the expenses when we commit the budget, part of the budget, with something. And I remember that what differs accrual accounting from accrual budget is invoice. Usually the budget comes before the invoice and accounting comes after the invoice. So what I remember is that when you have the same basis for budget and accounting, everything works a little bit better. And when you do not have it, one of them, budget or accounting, tends to prevail over the another. And I would like to hear from you, from your experience and from your studies, which would be, in your opinion and according to your studies, the best way to balance budget and accounting? Should it be better to use the same basis? Can we have good accounting and good budgeting under different bases? So I would like to listen to this aspect from you. Okay.
Excuse me, may I ask something else? Question. I was thinking on this issue too, but I would like to add some question. In Europe, you have the same standard setter of budget and accounting, in the same body, like in Brazil we have, we have the Minister of Planning setting rules, but Finance Ministry implement and rules budgetary accounting and accounting of the balance sheet and revenues, assets and liabilities. It's not the case of the US, for example, in the state governments, you have GASP ruling accounting, and you have other instances ruling budget. I just would like to know what is the reality of these aspects, besides your question of accounting.
Yeah, just one last information. In Brazil, the government does not even want to hear from accrual budgeting. It is not in the agenda, so it will not be discussed by the Congress. And people here, they are very resistant to accrual budgeting. And most of them say that the experiences with accrual budgeting did not work abroad. So internationally, it's not very successful. That's what they say, but I did not study accrual budgeting. So for me, it would be quite useful to understand and to see your it would be interesting if you could share your experience between accrual budgeting and accrual accounting. Should they walk together, or is it possible to walk in under a different basis?
I was right in scaring that question, because this is a very complicated question, and I am afraid maybe it is even too big for me to be answered. So I will try to say something, not to escape this, but really I think that this question would deserve a workshop on its own with invited papers and discussers. Well, I start with one sort of anecdote. Okay? Okay, always a good way to escape question. But the anecdote is true. In Italy, 20 years ago, a reform was introduced of local governments accounting, and that reform stipulated that the budget would remain in cash terms, and that at the end of the year, two sets of reports should be produced. One, it is the budgetary report, and the other is an accrual report. And I was at that time, I was a young professor in Bocconi University in Milano. We had courses for practitioners, seminars, in order to explain what it was about, and in order to convince maybe also that this was important, and we were all very enthusiastic for this. And one day I had in my room a director general of a municipality, and this guy learned me something, teach me something, okay, taught, okay, to teach, taught. He taught me something, I learned from him. The thing was, he said, Eugenio, look, you are explaining that accrual is important, etc., but when I have an amount authorized in the budget, and then we are at the end of the year, and that amount has been authorized, you can be sure that I will spend it, I will use that money, because it is legal, it is authorized. And so no matter what the consequence is on the financial reports in accrual terms. So what it taught me is that if there are two systems, one is prevailing. Okay. And so I remember this 20 years later. If there are two systems, one is prevailing. Now, to come to your questions. The matter is, I think that the matter is not it is a technical matter, but the technical aspect is less relevant than the political and than the systemic aspect. So because you were asking, is it better to have the commitment or the invoice? How can we have the two systems working with less difference from one to the other? My answer would be, in reality, probably, if we have two systems, whatever the solution chosen, again, one system will prevail. And so if the relevant aspect is the budget, then the behavior of the accountants will be to allow a smooth functioning of the budget. And so maybe they, if there is not money in the budget, maybe, but some expense has to be done, they will find ways in order to maybe to collect the things. And sometimes I would say going against the law sometimes is not to be a criminal, because sometimes the law are complicated, sometimes you run a public institution, a hospital, you have to commit, and if there is not money in the budget, maybe you sort of try to commit anyway, because this is what your citizens require, and then the accounting will follow. So please don't misinterpret me. I'm simply saying that accounting cannot be so powerful that it prevents whatever behavior, because the goal, you are young, but you have some memories of French had an important president, Charles de Gaulle, okay? And one of his sentences was that the politics will decide, and he said, l'intendance suivra, the administration will follow. So politics first, and then comes the administration. So we have to have this in mind. So I have an answer, and my answer is that I don't know whether it is better to have a cash budget or an accrual budget. I'm quite sure now that it is better to have one kind of budget, so not both, and but probably the accrual budget is in theory more informative. It is in theory better. Why? Because if the end of the year report is accrual, having an accrual budget would mean that you authorize not the expenditure, not the cash, you authorize the expenses, which ensure that at the end of the year your accrual report will break even, will ensure that the costs are not higher than the revenues. So that would be perfect, and you consider also the depreciation, provisions, etc., etc. In principle, it's perfect. If you go to look, Klaus Luther, Neues Kommunales Haushaltswesen, his proposal is about topic, so double entry bookkeeping, also in the budget. This is perfect. But only a few administrations in the world are using it. Probably the reason is that it is quite complicated. Budget is more in the tradition, and probably if Pigato is true in saying that, for instance, Brazil now is not yet one benchmark in the world. I like the thing that you can become a benchmark, but you are not yet. So what you need now is to have a technically perfect functioning system. So you have to enforce the fact that everybody is doing a budget, everybody is doing reporting, the information goes to Tribunal de Contas and goes when he has to go. Probably the best thing so far is to continue with the cash budget, and at the end of the year you will have, of course, that budgetary report. You will have also accrual reports. This is in line with what Ipsos board is asking, and this can be for the next 5 years, 10 years, when everything is running smoothly. Then this question maybe is more mature. Sorry for the long answer, but this is really an important question, and I think that if you are really interested, you have to. Thank you that you asked me, you listened to me, but you have to also to look for other authors, look for other ideas, because the answer is really complicated. Thank you.
Well, I think we should end now, unfortunately. So thank you, Mangualde, for being here. It was really a pleasure. Thank you, Professor Caperchione, to give the talk, to stay here, to enhance our knowledge on this subject of convergence. And we hope see you both again in the next opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
Thank you really.